Right on. Somebody call for an exterminator. That's what I thought. That's right. Ready to roll out. Battle cruiser operational.
Welcome to the 30th episode of the Undermind. Sounds like a lot, isn't it? And my guests are today Hao Pan. Hey Hao, welcome back yet again.
Thanks, it's good to be back.
And Dr. Bryan Weber, and welcome back to you as well.
Well, thank you. It's great to be back.
So, usual question to start off, what you've been up to lately. Let's start with Bryan, if that's, can I call you just Bryan, or are you
Yeah, that's
adamant on academic title always? Professor
No.
Dr. Weber, sir.
just Bryan. is good.
All right. So, what you've been up to lately?
As far as the bot goes, I have been scrapping a lot of the systems that I made in the past myself and replacing them with kind of the group systems, the BW, EM, BW, EB, and I just updated BWEB, and then kind of wiping lots of code in order to simplify the bot for students to work with easier in the future. The big section on my to-do list now is removing the debug sections and moving that to its own little module, because it's kind of tests are seeded through the whole bot, and I need them in an organized place. But all of this is much easier in hindsight, I suppose.
I'm also prone to using highly advanced if statements with text like if debug equals true, then do stuff.
Don't mock my development strategies.
No, hey, it's mine.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. It's usually if something's on the screen, then draw the line. It's a lot. But anyway, I've been pulling it aside. So this is, instead of a step forward, it's more of a step lateral. But hopefully, it's easier to move forward from there. It's paying back a lot of technical debt. So.
And using libraries has its advantages anyway.
I don't have to sweat and make sure that everything is, operating as smoothly. Commands are a little more canned. I don't have to spend as much time organizing and trying to document how I want everything to work on my end. It's just there. So.
Yeah. So same question to you. How? What's up with you lately?
Yes, so a few things. I think the first is the sort of the build order optimization. It has come to me only recently that I wasn't doing some of my builds properly, I would say. For example, in the TVP Siege Expand, I think Iron is doing a very similar thing. So I messed up a few timings. So the time I started the siege tech, it can be very, very late, like 30 seconds plus late. So it's very shocking for me to realize, oh, well, that's really bad, and I need to, fix a few things in order to, I want to say optimize, but at least improve this such timing. And this is very important because if the opponent is doing some sort of the goon rush build, then if the siege tech is not finished by the time the goons arrive at your base, then I don't know a good way to fend off the aggression without suffering too much loss. So that's the first aspect of the things I've been doing, and the second area I've been busy with is sort of the I think it's also the continuation of my what I talked in the previous episode of Undermind. It's the branching off of my builds. For example, if I'm doing a one Rex fast expansion TVZ build, and then the opponent is going for a full pull, and I've observed that the bot still tries to expand without, for example, reacting properly by building a bunker or producing some rings immediately. So it's I think it's a necessary thing for me to do, because as you go up on a ladder, and if you do I would say unpolished build versus some mid-ranked or low-ranked bots, and and if you lose like that by not reacting properly, then it it just doesn't feel like, oh, I deserve this placement on the ladder. So yeah, that's the second thing I've been busy with, and the last thing it's not necessarily the things I've been busy with in the past, but it's something I plan to do, is the tank micro improvement. I know at least in TVP, sometimes the tanks can suicide themselves into goons for for reasons I've yet to discover. I think the similar thing goes to Iron and Saida, surprisingly. Sometimes, yes, the tanks will suicide themselves, and it's not good because tanks are really, really expensive. If you think about their cost, it's 150 minerals plus 100 gas, and also their training time is really long. I think it's almost 30 seconds to train a tank. So I just can't afford to lose them like that, especially in the early game. So yeah, that's the things I've been working with or will be working with.
I imagine that since tanks take two supply, these are just two guys arguing that, oh, Jenkins, do you think we should siege up here? No, I do not think so. Why do you think so? And they just go back and forth and maybe siege, and the goons just firing them the whole time. And it's just a whole debacle.
Does Iron have like some sort of voting mechanism for the tanks? So if they get off sync, they might vote. I don't know. They might, if they're at a close number, they might be voting back and forth or something.
Well, generally, democracy is not a good way to run an army, and I'm just half joking with this because usually, even in StarCraft games, you need a quick and decisive action. Even if it's not the best thing, you have to do something right now. And for example, sieging and unsieging is something you see in many games, and that's not helpful. If you just fire at stuff unsieged, that's more helpful in any situation.
Yeah, I agree. The game is not often won by smoking the opponent by A moving. It's rather by a collection of intelligent decisions of all your units, including the tanks. And to sort of answer Brian's question, if Iron has some voting system, I think the answer is is only a half yes. So Iron checks if there are enough bodyguards around the tanks before before the tanks can be allowed to siege up. Otherwise, you will just lose the tanks because a single sieged up tank is quite bad. I mean, versus goons or versus zealots, if they get close to you, then, for example, in the blind range of the tank, I think it's within two by 32 pixels, then the tanks cannot shoot them. So that's bad.
Yeah.
It's like, contrary to the name, it is firstly and foremostly, is that a word? Tanks are artillery units, which means they are supporting something else. You can't win just with tanks, but you can't win without them either.
That's very true. I think that's very consistent with the military doctrine used in World War II. The tanks are primarily were used for infantry support. They provide the fire cover, and they're meant to destroy enemy fortifications and some strongholds, which the infantry would have a difficult time dealing with. So in this game, I think it's the same, very very similar thing. You have to get at least two different kinds of units and work together. It's very very hard to win a game using a single unit. And you can see those random bots. Not criticizing them, but for example, Dave Churchill or Andrei Kudymov, they oftentimes just go for one single unit, and then their placement is I would say not really high, maybe around 20th or 30th. So yeah, I mean, my point is, you have to use some other units other than a single unit.
While I don't think that's entirely accurate, debating World War II tank doctrine is outside of the scope of this podcast. And basically, yes, I agree with you. It's a support unit, but you have to define the word or role support very narrowly for that. Also, I wanted to ask you, say that you sometimes 30 seconds late to with siege tech. What is that compared to? What is your baseline for the timing of that?
So the baseline is simply Iron's timeline. It typically starts the siege tech around 4 minutes and 8 seconds. And I mean, Iron is a very, very respected bot, and it has been doing well throughout the years without much upgrade. So I think that's a good baseline. And since I sort of developed the build order system from scratch, which can be very very different than Iron's build. So it's just some issue I didn't realize until very recently. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, there are certain
Yeah, go.
there are certain like build order, I guess, like I'll call it, say, build order systems like Boss that don't work with the way I've set up the rest of my bot's decision making. Like Boss controls both buildings and workers and other items, and I think it would get very confused if I did something like, yeah, you'll control this stuff, but I manage the worker building, and so on and so forth. So those systems I haven't really looked towards integrating. But anyway, yeah, if Iron has something set up and then you build your own build order system, then I imagine there will be lots of things to look for.
And build order systems are something that you would think it's a good candidate for a common library. But it seems to me that so much things are so interconnected then that you can't just have one unified build order system. To elaborate that, let me compare it to, for example, databases. Databases are fine and useful, but there are different types and they are more useful for different types. I know it's a little bit of a forced analogy, but basically I think build systems will evolve to be similar but somewhat divergent entities, or everyone will just roll their own. Uh, but yeah, one of those. Feel free to disagree with me on this.
Well, like, I think building a building has a lot more parts to it, or even just the buildings have a lot more parts to it than we would anticipate. Like, the BWEB system literally just contains places to put the buildings. It does not contain, and it's a pretty large library. Like, that was a lot of work to put that together. That just finds places to build things. It does not send your worker there. It does not condition your worker on what to do if the path is blocked or challenging, or if something is at the end obstacle. And it certainly doesn't help you determine what needs to be built or when. And that would require an input system that would have to be unified. All of those are custom. So I think it's actually likely to be very not going to be a library anytime soon until you need to unify its inputs and determine what needs to be a part of it. It's too multifaceted.
Although it would be interesting if you could have libraries for every common problem you encounter, and there you can have a competition within that bounds. So the only thing you can improve within that scope is just unit micro or something. It in general, I think these narrow kind of competitions would be a good idea, but we don't have enough basic frameworks to be able to do that.
This is true. This is true.
All right. The next point I want to talk about is some news and events happening. And the first one is a relatively small one. I just saw that the DeepMind guys have a podcast, which it seems to me is a limited run and a little bit more academically focused with mathematicians and researchers, not industry participants. Have you heard anything about that? I mean, not through public channels. And Brian, you can see it, but I'm looking at you.
Oh, well, I haven't. I have not followed the podcast. No, I didn't know that was out there. August 20th, so maybe 4 days ago. Interesting. Uh, I'll put it on my to watch list here. Uh, let's see. But they do a lot of really interesting work. So obviously, obviously that'll be something I'll have to follow. Let's see. I will subscribe. There we go.
Yeah, the next part, big happening is the COG, of course, Conference of Games. I think that's the proper abbreviation. And have you been there, any of you?
My colleagues presented a paper there, but I could not make it this year. So we had a paper on causal inference in games. So like particularly we're looking at Dota, but it's I think causal inference in this setting is a pretty interesting problem.
Can you remind the listeners which university are you working for, please?
I'm at the College of Staten Island in Cooney, so out of New York City. Uh, the paper we put in was about determining what components of the game cause victory at the end, and if you take like a real simple approach, there are a lot of the components that are strongly correlated with winning, but that is because not because they assist with winning, but because they're a byproduct of winning, might be a good way of saying it. Um, maybe, for example, if you were taking a game of soccer and you used as an input the score 5 minutes before the game ended, that would probably be a very strong predictor, but there are a lot of reasons why that's not the cause of winning 5 minutes. That's not the cause of winning because it's the score 5 minutes before the end of a 90-minute game of soccer will be not the cause of winning, but a byproduct of winning. If you're 10 points ahead at that point, the game is already over, and it's not causing you to win. It happened on your way to win, and so that predictive component is important to measure.
I see. And two of the bot authors I know are actually presented stuff in the conference. The one was, of course, Dave Churchill, and the paper was titled Robust Continuous Build Order Optimization in StarCraft. I think it is publicly available, but I haven't had a chance to read it yet.
I think he may have posted a preprint, or maybe the original one was out. But I recall looking at it. He was looking at. Let me see if I remember correctly. Instead of so his build order system, the original one is you holistically determine a point that you want the bot to be at and a time you want it to be there. So I want 4 lurkers by 2 minutes or whatever. That's not possible, but let's pretend that that's your plan. And then it'll search through the possible build orders and attempt to arrive at that destination for you. And then his alternative one that seems to be working better works on a integral system. So it's roughly like an integral over your forces over time. And instead of just trying to meet one endpoint, it tries to maximize some integral of your forces. And that's going to be much stronger. I'm not sure if he introduced like basic time discounting or anything like that, like 10 units today is better than 11 units tomorrow, because having them now is better than having them later. You can do stuff with them.
When you first said it, I heard it as inter-girl communication, and that was something else.
Oh yeah, just an integral. So it's like some sum over. I have 10 units now, 20 units tomorrow. So over today and tomorrow, I had 30 units total. Though I assume he's discounting the future. Otherwise, you end up with really wacky build orders like build drones until 10 minutes and then build troops forever. Something like that.
I find it preposterous that my futile trolling attempts are always just rebuked by intelligent answers.
Well, it's maybe it's just sarcasm over the internet.
I don't know. It's a hard job, but someone has to do it. And so, continuing with COG news, the winners of the COG StarCraft tournament are Purple Wave, Macrave, and Locutus in this order. Congratulations to them. And Purple Wave with 88.56, Macrave with 85.48, and Locutus with 84.9% win rate, which is kind of impressive, although there were only 27 entries. Well, I shouldn't say only, because it is a steadily increasing number over the years, and I think for this kind of narrow scene, this is actually a good number.
Well, that's a big one. I self-selected out of the tournament this year because I haven't made that many changes. But the SSCIT at the end of the year I'll be in, and I believe one of my students will be having. We finished training the bot kind of like over the summer, and so we're gonna try implementing some more intelligent initial parameters for the bot based off of the opponent's past game. So more rapid learning as opposed to the incredibly slow genetic algorithm that I'm using now. The genetic algorithm I have now learned over about 1,000 games on a locked map with a locked seed, and it improved maybe like 10%, which is pretty garbage in the scheme of things, because locked map, locked seed is very, very specific. And so we'd like to replace it with something that can show improvement over 50 to 100 games on a random map against a random opponent. Something that gets better more quickly, rather than just trying and dying, which is not something you can afford in a tournament of a couple hundred games.
Oh yeah. And how did you participate? I think I saw your name, but I'm not entirely sure.
In COG, no, and also in AIID, neither of them I can participate with my bot due to company policy.
Oh, that's sad to hear. Then maybe I just saw some talk about it. Well, anyway, it's sad that we don't see your bot in there. Yeah.
Yes, but I will attend AIID in person. I just wanted to meet the folks in the community and chat with them and learn what's going on with in a very in a relatively short distance. So I looking forward to it.
Oh, it will be great, I think. And going back to COG, I saw the other bot author I mentioned is Niels Justason. I don't know if he's active in the AI scene still, but he had a bot some time ago, and he had a presentation about a bot for the game Blood Bowl. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's basically fantasy football, and it is evolved from an actual physical board game. That's all I know at the present moment. I thought it's just interesting.
Did he, I believe, did he go to, I'm just going to run through, I think he made, he started working on StarCraft 2 bots for a little while. Though I may, COEP, I'm going through his CV and seeing if there's anything there. I'm not sure. I saw him at COG last year, so that was pretty fun.
And it's great that you mentioned students, because that is one of the points I was thinking of talking about, because we see quite a lot students bots that gets uploaded to SSCIT, then abandoned. And this is most likely because these are like work for a thesis, and the students don't pursue bot development after graduating, which is fine, don't get me wrong. And do you think this is something we should aim to change, and maybe provide a more incentive for continuing bot development?
Well, a big part of it is that the students graduate and then they don't necessarily, they move on to better, bigger and maybe more immediately employment necessary projects, which is in a lot of ways good for them, that they have a nice sounding board to go off of. for example, next year, I think what will happen is there will have to be a different Dolphin bot. So then I guess there will be multiple versions of. I suppose we'll have to disable Dolphin bot and make a new one or something. But since the students are submitting it, they have the control of the emails for those, and they are now graduated or gone. So I will have to. There's some bookkeeping I'll have to keep track of, or telephone calls I'll have to make, or emails. There was an interesting opportunity where I was asked to present at one of the high schools, the Bronx High School, about the StarCraft bots, and I was very surprised at the level of complexity at the high school, but they were thinking of incorporating some of this into their curriculum in some way. They're a particularly precocious group, so it seems like that would be the sort of thing that they'd be able to do reasonably. Though I'm not sure that I'm not sure what point they'll be at, but they seemed very interested in incorporating this type of design into their curriculum. So we may find that there's some additional entrants next year.
I'm sure there is a joke about being in the Bronx and coding somewhere, but I'm not American enough to make that joke, sorry. Please proceed to laugh.
Ha ha ha.
Thank
Well,
you.
actually, it was I think the particular high school has like Nobel Prize winners out of it or something like that. It was extremely very, very impressive group of people to work with. It was a nice opportunity. So I suppose it's functionally no laughing matter. They were very good. And it was actually an excellent opportunity, but it is kind of a classic. Maybe it's a trope programming in the Bronx. I'm not sure, but anyway, they will do very well.
I wish them all the best. And that ties in to another thing, how I wanted to ask you that how did you become, let's say, AI developer? Because you, as far as I know, you work in actual AI related things in your day job. Is that statement true?
My day job works primarily with statistics. I do I do big data analysis for transportation stuff.
Sorry, please go on. But I did ask Mr. Howe.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said.
Oh, yeah. So I was doing also some sort of AI or machine learning things. It's about a model health assessment using some statistical techniques, and this was actually the stuff I've been doing throughout my PhD, and my current company was interested in continuing in pursuing this technique and be able to commercialize the work I did in the PhD. But then I think after a year of this kind of work, then the company CEO one day he came to me and we talked about the hot news, the Dota AI managed to beat a human, I believe, human pro 1-on-1 in Dota. Yeah, so so I so we talked about the AI and and I think that's the starting point for me to dive into this area or bot development. And initially, we were not certain if we were to go into the StarCraft 1 or Brood Wars scene or the StarCraft 2 scene. And I think at that time, the I'm not sure, but in my gut feeling told me that at that time, StarCraft 2 AI wasn't mature or wasn't easily accessible to many of us. So and also I knew at that time that it could also be just my gut feeling at that time. StarCraft 1 or World War Xing was much more mature. So eventually I decided, oh, I wanted to, focus in this area. And yeah, initially I think I somehow knew SSCAIT was there, so I looked through all the bot games and all the past tournaments, the finals, and of I'm just I guess it was just some chemistry, and I immediately I was attracted to Ironbot because I thought it was just cool and a really impressive bot, and then eventually we decided I we don't wish to reinvent the wheel, but rather just stand on top of the shoulder of giants and push forward. So yeah, that has been my goal or my dream while I develop the AI, sort of make something that is better than Ironbot. Yeah, I that's the start of my work in this bot AI development area.
Yeah, it's like a tale as old as time. You just saw the StarCraft and it was love at first sight.
Yeah, it's I still have a long way to go. Although being in this scene for I think almost 2 years, and yeah, we have someone who Crazy, for example, I think he's in this business for on and off for about 10 years. So, and he's not done yet. I mean, there's still some bot. His bot is not, winning 100% of the time. For example, Dragon, I think it's only 50% win rate. So yeah.
It's amazing that he's pulling that though. Dragon is pretty savage.
So in the meantime, yeah. So why I asked your career path is because it is my feeling that fresh out of college, even with a master's degree, it is kind of hard to find a job if you want to do something with AI. And how you mentioned that you did this after completing your PhD, which is obviously a step up from these levels. And as a beginner, you just can't do this right away. Do you think that's a correct impression from my side?
Well, I wouldn't say it's impossible for a beginner, but I would say I would hope if I were to recruit someone who's going to do this AI dev work, I would at least hope he has some master's degree or PhD preferably. Not because I want to discriminate between the students based on the degrees they have, but I just feel in order to do this kind of work, you need a lot of knowledge in machine learning and AI stuff. It's not really about implementation, but rather about problem solving and having the readiness to do this kind of work. You need statistics and mathematics and programming skills as well, and it it demands a lot. so yeah, that's my take on this.
So do you think it needs industry experience or software development experience? And maybe that's why you can't really get a job fresh out of college in this field.
Well, preferably yes, but in my personal opinion, I really lacked the programming skills when I first started. I believe I spent almost half a year trying to improve my C++ skills because my degree it's not about programming, it's about statistics and even mechanical engineering. So I coming from this background, I really spent a lot of time. And you can also see when I first started my bot, I think its rank was around 50th or even worse. Even though the bot is based on Ironbot, it's just because sometimes I mess up with the build order, so it has some production freeze, and in other times the bot had crash, and the crash is in auto loss, so it's just not good for the bot to progress in the on the ladder. So I guess yes, my point is it's not entirely impossible for a fresh beginner to dive into this AI dev area, but definitely it needs a lot, both the programming and machine learning or AI knowledge. Yeah.
Brian, anything to add?
Well, I think it's definitely something you need an advanced degree for, or at least a lot of math background. I find that when it comes to understanding those papers, uh, the statistics background is more useful than anything else that I have in my training toolbox. So the background in statistics or a background in uh, to understanding the machine learning or AI component is the statistics is important, but in order to execute and operationalize the programming is important. So you need a little bit of both or a good deal of both. Unless you're on a team so large, you only have to do part. Um, but even then, you kind of got to know how to interface with the rest of the group.
Although it is my personal opinion that some of the research papers, admittedly so, don't really have any actual advice for bot developers. Like sometimes they just use StarCraft as an example to prove something or disprove something. Which is fine, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but bot development and research on StarCraft is not always the same thing.
I really agree on this point. It's not easy to start. I think it's especially difficult when you first start the AI dev work. I think partly because over time, for example, the bots on the SSC AIT ladder on Bazel, they are things. At least some of them are actually getting improved. So, and also it can be evidenced by the sort of the slow shift of ELO rating. I think it a lot of the ELO ratings are higher now than previously, not because the bots themselves are better, but just because there are more bots joining, and yeah, I mean, I don't know the details of ELO, but that says something about the eventual gradual shift of the bot and the level they play. It's improving, and also from my my personal experience, I had fresh meat enabled very briefly on Basil, and well, I have to say, although it has some good builds, I mean, not those optimized builds, but still, it didn't do really well. I think partly because the micro is really bad. Oftentimes, it just A moves to the enemy base, and this is not good especially versus top bots. So yeah, it's currently being disabled. But my point is, it's really not that easy to start nowadays from a bot from fresh. maybe it'll be easier if you base your bot based on some established ones, for example, Steam Hammer or UAB, for example. But still, even that, due to the competition nowadays, it's still difficult, I would say. Yeah.
If only there were a book about it. Which is my next point, actually. If you haven't heard the news, I decided to write a comprehensive guide to BW API. And I started working on that and published a few, well, let's say excerpts from the book so far on my blog. But to be fair, it is quite a huge undertaking, especially because I thought that it would be a quick and simple way to just describe the workings, internal mechanisms of StarCraft itself, and use this easily understandable and well-structured code base called OpenBW. Now there were some little small flaws in this plan. Can you spot them all?
I have unfortunately not really touched OpenBW except for as a method to watch replays online in more detail. But that's probably my main use of OpenBW.
It is a tremendously useful tool, but the original code of StarCraft itself, it's well full of hacks, let's be honest here, and OpenBW is basically a reverse engineered version of that. So let's say it's not quite an easy task to do this, and I routinely get it wrong. And with writing the book, I wanted to ask you that what do you think I should maybe include in this, or let's say as a beginning bot author, what are the things you think that would have helped you the most?
I suppose for me, I ended up having to learn my C++ along with the bot. So for me, I was like, now how do I write a loop here? And, how do I deal with pointers and whatnot? So the learning process was pretty integrated, but for more advanced users, it would be interesting. I'd be interested in kind of like the architecture of the existing bots and how like a comparison of organization systems, like what do these bots consider micro tasks? What do these bots consider macro tasks? Do they, for example, if you have to send your worker to build a static piece of defense and that building's under attack, does that get managed by your tactical manager or your macro manager? Why? And I think a lot of those decisions are very relevant, and shifting those tasks has been at least helpful for the organization of my hopefully next version, and ideally for students in the future.
Well, I do assume an audience that already knows kind of how to program. But your second point is actually, I think it's a great idea. Maybe let's call it case studies of existing bots. And I can just do this by myself because there are a lot of great open source bots, but it would actually be the best if I coordinated this with bot authors. Yeah. I'm just thinking aloud at this point, but yeah, you've given me an idea here.
Oh, good. I'm glad I could help. I mean, my bot's not climbing up to the top 50, but it's got different takes a lot of work to do that.
Oh yeah.
We'll see.
How what do
Yeah, I
you
mean, yes. So for me, if I were to start this book on, a guide on bot BW bot development, well, I would hope that a few of the main libraries, as well as some well-established open source bot, are made available. Well, I wouldn't say made available, but rather the guide on how to use them, and some description of what they do should be made available to the reader. For example, I think BWEM its documentation is very simple and often says, "Oh, you just read the code and figure out yourself what this piece of code is doing." But oftentimes it's kind of hard by just looking at the code and understand how this code work, or what it does. And as a comparison, I'm not saying BWEM is bad. As a comparison, BWEB, the code readability is actually pretty good. But still, if you were to write this book, I would hope that some sort of guide on how to use these libraries can be created. For example, if you were to find the choke point, how do you do so using, for example, BWEM or BWEP? If you were to build, if you were to find a building placement, then how do you do so? So yeah, that's one aspect. That being the libraries, the main libraries should be made available. Well, once again, the guide should be made available. My second point is, some of the well-established open source bots. I mean, they're already available, but rather the guide to explain the inner workings of them. Like, for example, this build order manager, for example, that CPP file, what does it do, and how does it interact with other pieces of code within the bot? Or another idea is that we can start with some AITT bots because they're tiny and they're simple, although the readability is kind of
Zero.
si-
For some of them.
yeah, zero. But I guess, I mean, especially the unframe method, those bots, I think most of them did a good job at sort of show people what kind of things are the very, very basic a bot must have. For example, mineral gathering, and for example, A moving, for example, and other things. So that can be something useful, I think. Yeah.
I agree. And one of the plans is to include a chapter called Common Solutions to Common Problems, which deals with these kind of issues that every bot author will encounter sooner or later. And yes, including these guides would be wonderful. Although those guides, well, they need to be. I think I need to consult on the library authors with the library authors on those.
Oh, from my personal experience, I think there's a website or GitHub page called SKT Brain so it sort of collects all the resources available. Resources available for bot development, from academic research papers to other miscellaneous information, such as where to find SSCAIT website or that kind of thing. So I hope, at least for me, when I first started, I think it didn't do much to me, honestly, but it kind of helped me to sort of learn the background of all the necessary information there is.
Yeah, that seems to be useful. So let's move on to the next topic then, which is just a small heads up. As you might know, I'm casting SSE EIT replays every 2 weeks, and I decided to do this with a twist and comment on the inner workings of the bots and try to figure out what they are actually doing. And I was talking with one of the bot authors who has given me great insights about how his bot works. I'm not saying who it was, but it was Dan, and he was a great help to explain the inner mechanics of his bot. And I encourage every bot author to just contact me about this and maybe send a replay they want to cast, because I will gladly do it, and I think it's an interesting experience for authors and well, just generally for anyone, because it's half entertainment and half well, musing about development, to be honest. So yeah, that's not really a question or something you can relate to, I believe. um, Another thing I was thinking about, Bytekeeper recently raised the problem that he has a metric ton of replays, and he doesn't really know what to do with them, because what can we do actually with replays? We were talking about a replay analyzer for a while now, but do you think there is such effort, or is it worth the effort?
I do not keep the replays for my bot when I am training it, because I cannot inject the information in the replay in a meaningful way. I play the game and then I store a line of maybe 30 pieces of information at most, probably closer to 15. And then if the bot is not winning or the bot is close to having winning, then I have to investigate manually and watch the game myself. So keeping large archives of replays is very costly, and I just turn it. I actually have a section in my loop where I go back and delete the replays in order to prevent complications. So unless there's a tool available to make that easier, I think they will remain relatively unwanted, except for in the few cases where you have a specific problem you're trying to find and fix. But mass analysis of replays would be a very useful capacity. I think what's the name of the project? Facebook's project. I'm blanking. Has a way to analyze. Yeah, Cherry. I think the Cherry Pie interface has a way to analyze replays, but that right now is the only one, and it requires installation of that system. So yeah, I think that's. I don't have too much going on. Other than I've added some basic modeling for the opponent, some simple interface reading, very basic like inference and stuff. But we'll have to see how it turns out. I haven't even started the testing phases yet. I've just done writing and bug checking, and now I have to do testing. And it's amazing how you have to get regimented with that procedure. Write, bug check, test, bug check again, determine whether or not the addition is reasonable, accept or delete, move on from there.
Making bugs is much more fun than fixing them.
Oh, I found a bug the other day that must have been there for ever. Usually it's just forever, and then you fix it, and then I was like, oh, this sometimes everything breaks when you fix an old bug. This time everything worked slightly better, so that was good, or at least everything I could think of to test.
You didn't pull a McRave this time.
Yeah, exactly. Well, other than that, hopefully I'll have a new patch for you guys in another 2 to 3 months. So
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for being here today and enduring the endless trolling, of course. And I hope I will see, or much rather hear you soon again.
all right, looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks for having me here.
Okay, bye then.